From the Grayman Briefing, this is a summary of recent developments regarding the Second Amendment, cybersecurity, protests, supply chain disruptions, national security, law and order, free speech, censorship, government oversight, and more. Now, for your situational awareness, Super Essie will be reading out the latest update. Get briefs sent in real time at graymanbriefing.com. That's Gray with an A. Let's get into it.
This week, we're looking at that major dock workers strike that's threatening to close 6 of the U.S.'s top 10 largest ports. Also, there was an attack on a U.S. military base here stateside. And among other important developments in this week's brief, we're also tracking a terrorist attack on the electrical grid in Florida. The idea here is to provide you with situational awareness on those underreported stories so that you can stay one step ahead. Let's first get into the government oversight briefing. In New York City, a jury found former President Trump guilty on 34 counts of business records falsification related to that hush money case. Obviously, that's older news, but it's going to tie into this. So the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in July that Trump retains presidential immunity, but the judge in New York has postponed its ruling on this claim. It's supposed to be mid-August, but now it's going to be in September the 16th. If the immunity ruling is not applied, Trump would face sentencing on September 18th, potentially receiving fines or up to 4 years in prison. Analysts are divided. Many think he's going to get 1 year in prison, and we've got some unconfirmed sources that say Rikers is already preparing on the 18th to accept Trump as their prisoner. Let's move into the major incident briefing. This is the one we were talking about here in the forewarning. Joint Base San Antonio Lackland. So on August 17th, an unknown number of suspects in a sedan opened fire on security forces at the JBSA Chapman Training Annex security gate. This is over there in San Antonio, Texas. Security forces returned fire, but the suspect fled the scene. The base, which includes offices of the Air Force Intelligence, Surveillance, and Reconnaissance Agency, as well as the Cryptologic Systems Group and the NSA, were temporarily closed for investigation, and they weren't technically placed on lockdown. This is something major that happened. I mean, a car came up and it wasn't trying to get through the gate. It just drove up and an unknown number of people fired at security there and then fled the scene. Let's move into supply chain and labor force. The U.S. dock workers strike has escalated labor tensions at major ports, and they're already impacting the global supply chain. The International Longshoremen's Association, or the ILA, is demanding better wages and conditions amid claims of record profits for shipping companies. Negotiations have stalled, and if demands are not met by October 1st, 40,000 port workers are set to strike, potentially closing those 6 of the 10 largest U.S. ports. And this is on the East Coast and the Gulf. So if this does happen, which it hasn't happened on the East Coast since the mid-1970s, be prepared for economic losses and delays in products. This will specifically affect businesses first, but then obviously the business is the one supplying to the citizen. So be aware of that. Let's talk about that massive data breach that exposed Social Security numbers. Potentially exposed the Social Security numbers of nearly all U.S. citizens. It involved 2.7 to 2.9 billion records that were leaked on a public forum. This included Social Security numbers, names, date of birth, aliases, physical addresses, and more. The data is believed to have been obtained from National Public Data, a broker that sells data to background check firms and employers. Experts advise that you should begin monitoring your credit, placing fraud alerts, and taking other protective measures. And the U.S. Department of Defense, so keep this in mind. The name of this hacking group is called USDOD, not to be confused with the U.S. Department of Defense. So the hacking group is called USDOD, unrelated to our actual Department of Defense. And anyway, they're the ones who've claimed responsibility for that. Moving into the health and safety briefing. The World Health Organization has declared monkeypox, or what they now call Mpox, so it doesn't offend people. They've declared it an outbreak and a global emergency. Basically, they're using the PHEIC designator, the Public Health Emergency of International Concern, which is the highest designator the WHO can give. It's the one that gave the COVID-19 thing back in 2020. And the Africa Centers for Disease Control and Prevention has also declared a public emergency over the outbreak. And it's starting to spread a little bit in Europe. Obviously, if you are not into kind of things you maybe shouldn't be into, you probably don't have to worry about monkeypox. Let's move into a survey here, a Gallup poll on U.S. support for childhood vaccinations. So a Gallup poll released in July reveals a significant decline in the number of U.S. adults who believe childhood vaccinations are extremely important. In 2024, only 40% of respondents held this view. This is down from 58% in 2019. So overall, I think the report goes back to 2001, the polls do. Support for childhood vaccinations have been decreasing since the early 2000s, and significantly since the COVID-19 vaccine. Okay, let's move into national security and terrorism. And as a reminder, if you want to get any more details on any of these kind of bottom line up fronts I'm giving you on each one of these developments, go to the graymanbriefing.com, and they've got the sources, they've got analysis on each one of these things. We're just kind of cruising through their recent briefings and giving you a short summary. Okay, so back to national security and terrorism. A Jordanian national was arrested and charged with threatening to use explosive devices and destroying an energy facility in Orlando, Florida. The suspect sent threatening letters to businesses perceived to support Israel. He went on to destroy a solar power facility, causing $700,000 worth of damage, and he vandalized local businesses. The FBI reported that the extremists aimed for, quote, hate-fueled mass violence, motivated by a desire to target businesses for the perceived support of Israel. The FBI said he left warnings that his goal was to, quote, destroy or explode everything here in the whole of America, especially the companies and factories that support the racist state of Israel, end quote. The attacks began in June, and the suspect was just arrested last month. Now let's shift into civil unrest and societal collapse. We're going to kind of read out this one kind of more directly from the briefing, so the wording may be a little spotty here. So on August 7th in Denver, Colorado, 15 pro-Palestinian protesters trespassed into the Center on Colfax. That's an LGBT community center. They staged a sit-in. They demanded to meet with the board to discuss the center's alleged funding from weapons and tech manufacturers linked to Israel. After 7 hours, SWAT was called out, and everyone fled before police arrived, though. Those groups involved were the Disability Liberation for All Gay, Liberation Front for Palestine, and Denver Students for a Democratic Society. Over in Ferguson, Missouri, we're talking about the same Ferguson, Missouri you're probably thinking of. Black Lives Matter and civil rights activists and anti-law enforcement activists protested. 5 rioters were charged in connection with that protest, marking the 10th anniversary of Mike Brown's death, which was real justifiable. During the riot, 3 Ferguson police officers were injured, 1 critically with a brain injury, I believe put into a coma. Multiple people were charged with vandalism, including felony damage to property. The suspect who assaulted and then left the scene and left that 1 officer critically injured, he was identified as an alternate delegate for the DNC and a member of the City of St. Louis's Civilian Oversight Board. The protest was one of several events held to remember Brown, whose death in 2014 obviously sparked those national riots. Moving over to LA in California, pro-Palestinians and activists associated with If Not Now blocked traffic on I-405, bringing all lanes to a standstill. In New York City, the pro-Palestinians rioted right after the Democratic after-party event for VP Harris. They assaulted police, deployed commercial smoke grenades, and vandalized property. Mass arrests were made. Keep in mind, we tracked about 80 different, or at least the Grayman Briefing tracked 80 different protests related to pro-Palestinians over the past week, but they just obviously aren't going to cover them all here. So there's so much of that stuff going on. Just be aware of that. Well, let's move into Chicago, Illinois, where that DNC is happening. That's the Democratic National Convention. There were at least 7 protests scheduled each rallying for against various different causes and views. 35,000 pro-Palestinians from 200 different organizations were expected to protest. Another 25,000 protesters from pro-choice, pro-life, anti-police, social justice, Antifa-related, pro-Trump, pro-Harris, LGBT, and immigration-related groups were expected to protest. Non-scalable fencing and security barriers were erected. Multiple law enforcement agencies, including the USSS, were deployed. CPD officers had their leave requests rejected, were told to work overtime and off-duty assignments to combat the anticipated unrest. Planned Parenthood put up one mobile center and another facility nearby to offer on-site abortions and vasectomies. We've got a lot of coverage on the civil unrest during the DNC week. We're going to save that for next week, as that's just wrapping up now. Let's move on. In California, on August 17th, Trump supporters conducted a caravan. This is like a type of rally where 100 plus vehicles on what they call the Trump train drove through California, displaying U.S. flags, pro-police, and MAGA signage. Yeah. Okay, let's move into the Second Amendment. In Massachusetts, the NRA-linked Gun Owners Action League, GOAL, has filed a referendum petition challenging a recently passed gun control law that bans pretty much all firearms. The petition seeks to overturn the law through a statewide, basically ballot measure. This is something they want to be placed on voter rolls, the ballots in the upcoming election, so citizens can decide if that law banning firearms should continue. In New Mexico, an increase in the utilization of red flag laws, or the ERPOs, Extreme Risk Firearm Protection Orders, has been identified. So a lot more people are using ERPOs to get rid of other people's firearms. Moving on, in Minnesota, a new law has implemented a 72-hour waiting period for firearm purchases. This went in effect this month, just here in August. The law aims to provide a, quote, cooling off period to prevent impulsive acts of violence, including suicides and mass shootings. Over in New York, in response to the SCOTUS's Bruin ruling, New York City now allows non-citizens to apply for concealed carry permits. Did I say non-citizens? I definitely meant to say non-residents. The city now allows for non-residents to apply for concealed carry permits. The law also includes mandatory background checks and firearm safety training for all applicants. Let's look over in Florida, that open carry ban, which is just kind of a thing in Florida. You pretty much got a lot of firearm rights in Florida, but you don't have open carry. So, Gun Owners of America has filed a lawsuit challenging Florida's ban on openly carrying firearms, arguing that it's a violation of Second Amendment rights. The lawsuit contends the state's restrictions is unconstitutional. In Oregon, the Firearms Policy Coalition and Oregon Firearms Federation have filed a lawsuit challenging a law that bans unserialized firearms, what many on the left call ghost guns. The law passed in 2023 goes into effect this September and prohibits the sale, manufacture, possession of any firearm or parts without serial numbers. We did that one pretty quick for you, under 15 minutes. That's it for this week's summary of recent developments. Remember that all these briefings are delivered in real time to Grayman Briefing subscribers, sent via the Telegram and Signal apps. They're also sent weekly via email. Due to time constraints and the risk of censorship, we can't cover it all here. The Grayman Briefing is open to the public on Instagram and Telegram. Give them a follow and comment either here on the broadcast or on their socials. Thanks for listening. Remain aware, be vigilant, and stay safe.
Get unredacted, real-time briefings sent via email and through the Telegram and Signal apps by joining the Grayman Briefing.